welcome back. This is the KAA Kajukenbo Deep Dive. I'm John, and this is episode 4 of our look into the history of Great Grandmaster Charles H. Gaylord. My guest today is Grandmaster Bill Sills. So thank you for joining us, sir.
Thank you.
So Grandmaster Sills is a Kajukenbo black belt, 9th degree black belt in the Gaylord system, and is also a Grandmaster. You've trained with Grandmaster Gaylord since around 74, 75, right?
Yes, I started at Golden Dragon in February of 75, and I've only had 2 instructors. So,
Oh, okay. Two, sorry, Grandmaster Gaylord and...
Senior Grandmaster Pete Morales.
I see, okay. So you were with Grandmaster Gaylord. How did you meet him, and what was he like? What was your first impression of him?
When I first met him, and I was probably a white or a purple belt at the time, he came into the school, everybody came to a set position. I had heard stories, and it was, oh, shit. It's an easy way of explaining it.
Okay.
But when he came into the class and started after the warm-ups, he was no nonsense. You were there to train. He demonstrated, back knuckle on me a few times.
Was he wearing the ring then?
No, that wasn't, well, not when he was doing this, because it was just straight back knuckle, not the fist. And it was love tap at the top or surface, range, back of the back. So I got to feel each one of those love taps. As things went on, I got to know him little bit by little bit as I came up in ranks.
And what were those classes like?
With him, no nonsense. During the class, it was very straightforward, professional, old school, and I do mean old school. Just a pleasure to be around. Outside the ropes, he was easygoing. Once you got to meet him, there's one story I'd like to put in there.
Go for it.
Okay, he was Grandmaster Gaylord was well known throughout the Bay Area. One time, Martin Buell, who founded Universal Karate. Anyway, he came into town, Grandmaster Gaylord, they all kind of met down at Golden Dragon. To see 2 white guys, or 2 Howleys, talk pigeon, 90 miles an hour was an education.
That was your first time, huh?
Oh yeah, hearing those 2, yes. But it was, he was definitely no nonsense in the training area. Outside the training area was a totally different matter. Approachable. You would see things with him. Oh, it's the easiest way to put it. When you trained with him, he would show you techniques or go through techniques with you. You better remember him, because 5 or 6 years down the line, you might see him again. But he was always innovating techniques. One of the best things I remember about him, or was drilled into me, was A sets B, sets C, sets D's. So up, down, in, out, those kinds of motions.
Flowing from one to the other.
Yeah, well, and you flow down
Mm-hmm.
You came up. The body's going to go in a certain direction
Mm-hmm.
from what you do. So you flow, make that flow work,
Mm-hmm.
and pick your opening.
Tell us a little bit more about what he was like. You mentioned he was a little bit different outside of the ropes. Tell us more. What kind of person was he?
Uh, he was an individual that if he wanted to learn something, he went and learned it.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, Back in the, what was it, 80s when CDs were popular.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, he was also known as Dragon One
Okay.
in that group. But
Yeah.
I ran into him in a CD shop where he was learning how to peak and tweak a CD to put out more than was legally allowed. But he got a hold of the guy that was running the shop, traded out privates
Mm-hmm.
for knowledge. Later on, he wanted to learn how to sing.
Mm-hmm.
So one of his black belts up there started working with him to learn how to sing.
Huh.
I hooked him up with somebody in Las Vegas that was also doing what he was doing. Those two would trade songs back and forth and critique each other.
Ah.
So he was always learning. If he didn't know something, he would go out and find a way of learning it so he could do it.
So he was always wanting to learn, always a student.
Yes, definitely always a student.
Now, I've heard about him doing the CB radio before and being Dragon One. What was his interest in that? Do you know why he liked that so much?
If the skip was correct, he could hit Hawaii
Wow.
on what about probably, if he peaked it out a little bit, probably about 7 watts of power without having to get into a ham radio license where you can have more power to output. But skip, you could go, if the skip was right, you could talk one side of the U.S. to the other side or 2,500 miles to Hawaii.
Wow, and that's what he wanted to do, huh?
He had an interest. He went and did it.
So
Yeah.
you spent your time training with him, also seeing him outside. Did you ever see his interactions with other instructors very often?
Uh, Probably when he came down to the school I trained at mainly, which was Golden Dragon, he would be down there once a month.
Mm-hmm.
Talk to Pete and Brian. When I moved down to Las Vegas, a friend of mine introduced me as a Gaylord black belt.
Mm-hmm.
And you could see the eyes go, whoops. So he was well known down, overall.
Uh-huh.
He would come down to Las Vegas for the KSDI tournaments, and he was always walking around, people looking him up, or you'd see him chatting with people, and
Sounds like a very friendly guy.
yeah, but it's one of those things. Don't mess with him. Don't cross him.
So, can you tell me a little bit more about the training in those days? How hard were people hitting? How they were like.
How hard were they hitting? Well, let's see. I never got to train at the Five Corners School or the Fremont School. Golden Dragon, we trained on concrete.
Mm-hmm.
And we had his school training with us for, I believe, about a month. Then they went to a warehouse space behind the Julio Pontiac. And from there, they went to the Alice Miller building, which had carpet upstairs and those kinds of things. So it's, you mentioned the ring.
Yeah.
A number of us got to know what that ring was like. Is on it, yeah. If he punched straight fist, you felt the ring. And it could be tattooed all over your body. But he was fun to use for. I enjoyed it.
Uh-huh.
You just, with him, you just went with the flow. I remember doing stick techniques with him one time. He was expecting a right hand or a number one. I came with the number two. I saw a blank face. And I just went with the flow because I knew something was coming. Didn't know what it was. But him and I joked about it after that. He was just, to me, he was a joy to train with. Mm-hmm. It's kind of like Great Grandmaster Juarez said, some people would see him come in the door and they were out the back door.
Yeah.
For us, the side door.
Uh-huh.
Because they knew they were in for a hard workout. Mm-hmm. One of the things I remember most about him, or a quote from him, was, in order to give pain, you have to be able to take pain. Mm-hmm. So get used to it now, get used to it in the training area.
That's true.
You're used to it here. When you hit the streets, no big thing.
Yeah, I've heard those kind of stories. I've heard some survivors in Kajukenbo, survivors of gang fights kind of thing. You know, they hit me harder in the dojo, is what they say.
I was working a security gig or, place in San Carlos where there was a altercation. There we go. And I got sucker punched from the side. My glasses went flying. Chased the guy down, kind of rearranged his face into the trunk of a car, and held him there until the police showed up. Mm-hmm. The venue supervisor said, asked me if I was hurt. And I looked at her and I said, you know what, or basically, you know what I can take. Because she was also a Kajukenbo black belt.
Ah.
And, he hit me in the head. Give me a break. No big thing.
Yeah, that is part of our heritage, hitting hard. If you were to take a look back, what would you say was Grandmaster Gaylord's biggest impact on the martial arts or on Kajukenbo or in the world?
Being able to innovate, pass on chi, or how to develop chi, mm-hmm. especially within his style. He was always innovating, always changing. Mm-hmm. Nothing was static. Mm-hmm. The other thing he used to drill in was there's a beginner's way of teaching a technique, an intermediate way of teaching a technique, and an advanced way of teaching the technique. Mm-hmm. And that's, once you got that through through my thick skull, it was easier to gauge what was going on. Uh-huh. And easier to teach. Much easier to teach.
So would you say that Grandmaster Gaylord affected your teaching in that way? Like, did he change the way you taught other people?
Yes. I used to have a beginner's class of like up to 50 white belt going up, and I would teach them a certain way. The 7 or 8 people I worked on from their brown to their black developing. Then I would go in and fine tune the techniques. Mm-hmm. But at that point, they understood what you were doing. A white belt, it's kind of like Pinyon 1, where it's out, up, in, right? Mm-hmm. Okay, they aren't going to understand the reason for the brush block, then the outward block or brush. They aren't going to understand those nuances. Mm-hmm. Or going through some of the punch arts, why we brushed and then, okay, there's a reason for this, but then there's a reason for this.
Right.
Right. This sets this up. It's those kinds of modifications, if you will, that I learned from him. It's, those things are invaluable. Mm-hmm. It's like a student, I think he was about 14 years old in Las Vegas. We were going through techniques, and I broke it down to simplify it for him, and he said, "Oh, light bulb," because you could see the eyes open up. Now he understood. Yeah, things like that that's what is important as an instructor. Mm-hmm. When you see that light come on in the head.
Do you feel that Grandmaster Gaylord balanced his own learning with being a teacher well? Do you ever think that he was maybe doing too much of one or the other? Did he do a pretty good balance of?
He balanced it quite well. Mm-hmm. Once he learned something or adapted a technique, then he would work with you to understand why he was going in that direction. Mm-hmm. Kaji is a ever-evolving art. Things that worked back in 47 to 52 in Hawaii aren't applicable to what's going on in California in 2020.
Right.
Fighting, altercations change or the techniques change. And Kaji has to adapt and grow and learn. There was another phrase that DGM used to use was, "I've shown you my techniques, the forms, the punch arts. You can make modifications, but don't make it look like crap or I'm going to come down and beat." Which was pretty true. So everybody, if they fine-tuned a punch art, they got approval. Or he would check it out. If he didn't like it, he would tell you. Mm-hmm. And that's one thing. He loved his black belts. Mm-hmm. His heart was always there for him. Great guy.
Yeah, that sounds like he really was a great guy. I think we all kind of miss having him around.
Larger than life.
Yeah, he was. So we're almost finished for today, Grandmaster. Last question I want to ask: if you could pass any message on to Great Grandmaster Gaylord now, if he came down and you could talk to him, what would you like to tell him?
like to tell him that his second, third, fourth generation black belts are carrying his legacy on for him, making it real in his honor. And if you need to, come down and re-educate a few people.
All right. So that's all we have time for today. Thank you, Grandmaster Sills, for talking with me. I really appreciate it.
I loved it. Glad you're doing what you're doing, because stuff like this needs to be there for future generations.
I agree. I think this is good for the future, to everyone to know what kind of person he was, to hear all the stories. Thank you, those of you guys watching at home. This has been the KAA Kajukenbo Deep Dive. I hope you like the show. Stay tuned for our next one. Until then, stay strong, stay Kajukenbo strong. Mahalo. All right, cool. So that'd be the end of the show as well. It sounds like you have a wife who's taking good care of you.
Yeah, I get dirty looks.
He takes pretty good care of me. We take care of each other.
That's good. I get the same dirty looks from my wife, so I understand. It's done out of love.
Yeah, and a 2x4.